Whew. Alrighty, has it been a week, guys? Now, welcome to another moment, and finally I get a moment for myself, and actually let's say ourselves, because I get to enjoy some tea as I reflect on the week. This time it's ice brewed gyokuro, which I should have thought this through a little bit better, but I guess being tired from the week. This can happen because this is absolutely not going to be ready by the time we finish chatting about what we want to talk to you about this today. So we'll be chatting, but unfortunately the tea will have to wait. I will enjoy this sometime tonight, but probably not now. So this week has been a roller coaster all week. Nothing too dramatic because I think there's always scales, zooms, and perspective into things. And when I stop and think about these zooms and perspectives on how you can see things that should cause desperation are probably more serious, like bankruptcy, loss, and health issues and other things. This is just, let's say, a difficult speed bump in our Saint House journey. And I think I sit here today because there were 3 main lessons I would like to share with you. And hopefully I'll be able to convey this well enough so it can be of use to any other person wanting to run their venture, or actually who's out there working, managing, or collaborating with other people, because this could probably be useful all the way around, not just for entrepreneurs, solo freelancers, or CEOs, but it could be actually pretty useful to most. Now, what are these 3 lessons? Let's get to it. So the first is, don't build your bridge solely based on one main single pillar. And what does that mean? That basically means that it is absolutely imperative and it is recommended to have and build and nurture and train and make strong foundations and establish strong foundations in your venture, your business, your team, whatever you're trying to create. However, no, don't make weak dependencies. And what I mean by weak dependencies is you always have to make this pillar not the only support system of your whole bridge. Because then if that bridge falls and the flow stops, you're going to have to build a whole new pillar and everything is going to be stopped while you build this pillar as fast as you can. And building it as fast as you can, you might actually probably have some other issues. Now, I understand this is more of a problem that can be related to smaller environments, so small teams, very small businesses, where you're slowly introducing people, or you're slowly growing your team, and one by one, you give them a lot of responsibility, a lot of areas of competence, and they've learned things, they learn the trade, the craft, and then they become autonomous, and so you can actually start focusing on other things and use your time wisely to help grow the overall environment. But I'm not saying one should not allow this person who has obtained this level of knowledge and responsibility and is capable now to run itself and run their tasks and their projects autonomously. But one should always, build some fail-safe, some backup plans, and create a network where even if the plan A kind of stops for a bit or interrupts itself completely, there's a plan B and a plan C in action. What does that mean? That could mean, even if it's a very small team and you just have 2-3 people, that all of the 3 people are in the loop of whatever each person is doing. So if one gets sick, the other one can back up and cover. And if it's maybe just the CEO, you knowing what it is. So if this other person eventually decides to quit or isn't available for some kind of emergency or anything that can happen in life, you're not just left there with a bridge with no pillar. This may seem pretty obvious, but this did recently happen this week where it exploded. The situation that unfolded actually exposed this flaw that we had. Not too much in Essentials because we just started last year, so there's not really like an established team that could create that problem, but more in Ikeda in Japan. And as partners of that company, we are assisting in trying to manage through this transition and this turbulent moment. And so, talking about turbulence, we move on to lesson number 2, which is the storms will pass, but the landscapes will change. And what I mean by this is basically we should learn to embrace turbulence and embrace unexpected turmoil and unexpected events that can really shake things up, because eventually they'll bring 2 things, which are disruption and clarity. And disruption might sound negative, but it actually isn't that negative, because the general human tendency is to once we get comfortable into our ways and we know what we're doing, what we're flowing, we're more prone to keep flowing in the same direction than to keep gravitating toward constant change and constant novelty, because changes novelty, changes uncertainty, changes the unknown. And unless we're kind of completely attracted by that, the general human consciousness, I think, will tend to flow in a pattern they recognize. And so this disruption actually shakes things up, and I think every now and then we should always remind ourselves to shake things up, to see if we're too comfortable, if we're too in our flow and just too used to things. And maybe you're in a phase of life where you want it that way, but in a company, I think if it's yours, if you're running it, you should never be too comfortable. You should always keep yourself kind of on your toes every now and then. And that disruption, once the chaos, the tension, or whatever's fire happens and it all passes and it clears, it'll give you clarity. For example, the situation we've had of this storm happening this week with our partner in Japan is regarded specifically to an employee where, let's say this person revealed their cards officially to Ikeda, my partner, and the cards were pretty unpleasant and aggressive, meaning that they were more towards the fact of not being satisfied with our involvement, Sencha House's involvement in European operations of Ikeda, and receiving commissions for the services and the operations that we oversee or we provide, even just visual and support to. And that if this support continued and our involvement continued, this person has basically threatened to leave the company, quit, and subsequently put Ikeda and the company in temporarily chaos, where, as referring to the previous lesson, the bridge would be temporarily broken in half for the short unforeseen future until the quick patch could be made out of it. So the storm is clearing because we're understanding the situation better and better, and we're, now we've had a week to put our heads to it and think over it and discuss and evaluate, and as we're kind of arriving to our conclusions, things are made clear, because we were in a bit of a, not conflicting, but a mild situation where we had slightly different feelings regarding this employee anyways, who I always kind of felt that this person was not completely on board with the project, because also just by the simple nature of how some things were said and completely agreed by this person in meetings where we were all together, and then on a day-to-day basis this wouldn't happen. The things we would agree and ask upon were ignored. Email correspondences would often be lacking in terms of clarity, cooperation, and many other things which, you start putting the dots together and you kind of start to get a picture of it. And talking about this, I think it's fair to move to lesson number 3, which is to trust, but always with one eye open to the wind. Because I think being open-hearted, bonding, creating relationships, whether it's for work or in life in general, is a key aspect of, I think, what can create serenity in the life of someone, and how it just makes the overall experience of life and whatever we're doing better. Because if I think any of you might have been in a room where there isn't trust, there isn't that bond, and it just kind of feels cold, it feels empty. And when you walk into a room or a team or a company where there is that trust, there is that bond, there is that connection, it just feels different. The room also looks brighter. The people are just naturally smiling more. There's more interaction. There's more shared laughter. There's more moments, and it just changes the mood of everything. So I think one should always look forward to building and finding people to trust. However, I think one should never kind of be too naive, and there should be a sense of realism and objectivity and all of it. And what does this mean? This basically means that when it comes down to all of it, unless it's your die-hard partner in life where you've decided to marry and create a family, and you've decided that that person is going to, together you guys are going to ride it through and through, everybody else, even your friends, your siblings, and sometimes your parents too, when the situations get complicated, they will ultimately fend for themselves first. And they will ultimately always have their perspective. One of my morning practices I always have is while I meditate and while I'm towards the middle of my meditation, I have a few, things I remind myself of, frequencies I want to have, thoughts I want to keep in my mind, because it's good to remind myself every day of the person I want to be, the values I have. And one of the things I always tell myself every morning is perspective, and how in any given single moment there are at least 360 angled views of something. And if you add the decimal points and the zoom levels, the perspective points are absolutely infinite. So this tells you that whenever basically you're having an interaction with some other human, almost certainly they're gonna be viewing that moment, that conversation, that topic with a different perspective from yours. And I think sometimes we tend to forget that. So keeping that one eye open to the wind always reminds you that to not, be too completely naive about the whole situation. And sometimes things can shift, and if the perspectives were aligned until a certain point of the path and the journey, maybe they could shift. Like they shifted where Ikeda thought this person was a great pillar to be building the foundations of the new generation of his company, and it just happened to be that they just have a different perspective and a different understanding on certain topics, particularly us and St. Charles. And that has brought to this turmoil, and let's call it unprofessional behavior, where he is now in a position of having to, in a position of difficulty where he's going to have to rethink things very seriously. And probably very likely plan a future without this person. And so, that kind of really shakes your perspective when you think about it. So that was the third lesson out of so many other tiny things I've learned from a roller coaster of a week, but I think these were the three main ones from the brief moments of reflection I was able to cut out for myself during this week. I hope some of this, if any, even a tiny bit, has been useful for you, yourself, your life, your business, your journey, whatever it could be, because ultimately I'm here so that we can share these moments, and when you share moments, we ultimately always learn something, or something, if something remains out of any interaction, it's always something good. Now, moment of truth. I don't know if the ice melted. It doesn't look like it. I mean, if you guys look for yourself, I don't know if you can see it, but yeah. And it's 10:38. I don't think this is happening. I might have to dilute it with some water to get some tea going. Let's give it a try to see if any of this is going to actually come up. Oh, a tiny bit. Thanks. Well, kanpai. Oh, wow. Okay, that's an extract. I think I'm going to dilute this now so I can drink more of it. Thank you for sharing this moment, and I look forward to our next one. Ja, matane.